As Washington recovers from the damage pro-Trump rioters caused yesterday, far-right groups are spreading misinformation about it online. The headline on NBCNews.com from Brandy Zadrozny and Ben Collins says Trump loyalists push evidence-free claims that Antifa activists fueled mobs. That strategy, often labeled as a false flag attack. Ben is here with me now. Ben, if you know, you know, but if you don't, can you explain false flag attacks a bit more for our viewers who might never have heard of them?
Yeah, it's a big thing in the conspiracy internet. The concept is somebody performs a terror attack, or in this case, a riot, and does it to try to frame another group of people. That is not what happened here. Straight up, the people who stormed the Capitol yesterday were pro-Trump militias, QAnon conspiracy theorists, and other ragtag groups of Trump fans. How do we know that? It's because, we know the specific people. They were at Trump rallies for years. They were alt-right influencers. They were people whose faces were easily recognizable from some of the darker corners of the pro-Trump internet. So this is not Antifa. The Washington Times put out a story last night saying that there was a facial recognition technology that they used to identify Antifa members. That has already been pulled down. That's been removed from their website because the story was false, and it was pushed by people on these very same websites that organized this exact riot.
Ben, I think the question we just keep hearing over and over and over again since yesterday is, how did we not see this coming? You have been watching these online forums, social media posts flood in for years. There were warning signs for months about yesterday. You and Brandy even had a story about the growing violent threats on Tuesday, a day before the riots. Let's talk about this a little bit more. How did law enforcement miss this?
They failed. That's how they missed it. This is a group of people who are known to commit violent action. The 4chan and 8chan crowd, if you were alive a year ago, you might remember this. In the summer of 2019, they were murdering people and leaving white nationalist manifestos on 8chan, which is now 8kun, and 4chan. These same websites were organizing this rally. The people on this website, but on 4chan and the Donald and 8kun, these are pro-Trump, far-right websites that promote the Proud Boys, promote QAnon, and promote militia movements. They said January 6th, we're going to storm the Capitol. The debate on those websites wasn't should we storm the Capitol. It was should we kill police when we're there. That's what was going on. I have no idea how this was missed by law enforcement. It's a massive strategic failure. I'm not saying the people on the ground did anything in particular. I'm saying strategically, there should have been more people there, right, and they just didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, one of the things that I've heard from a number of people, including my husband, who just mentioned it in passing this morning, he said they had T-shirts printed with the date. He goes, you don't just do that 5 minutes before you go somewhere. This was planned in advance. I mean, it was clear that this was not something that just popped into their minds when an hour beforehand. And we've heard from Yasmin Vasugian earlier today. So many of them traveled from out of town. They just didn't, this wasn't just a spur of the moment thing. I got to ask you some more about the people who stormed the Capitol building, because there was one in particular you have some reporting on. What can you tell us?
There's a guy his name's Jake Angeli. He goes by the QAnon shaman. He was the guy on the dais there. He was wearing that pelt. Looked like that. The guy who really stormed his way into the Capitol was a man from Des Moines. He was wearing a QAnon shirt.
Oh, the guy with the horns.
Yeah, there's the guy with the horns there. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That guy has been at pro-Trump rallies for months and months. And shortly afterwards, people tried to frame this man as Antifa. This would be the longest bit of all time if this guy was Antifa for a couple of years, going to pro-Trump rallies, pretending to be a QAnon supporter. That's not what's happening. Reality conflicts with these conspiracy theories. And, the reality is we know who these people are. And a lot of these people have merchandised these things. That guy had a GoFundMe based on this bit he was doing. Like you said, this was a merchandised event. They had planned for it. They made T-shirts. They had live streams collecting donations for it. They knew what they were doing. Don't let them say anything otherwise.
All right, Ben Collins, always great to have you, especially on a day like this. Really appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi not messing around today, calling yesterday's acts of sedition an attempted coup by President Trump and his supporters. She also joined more than 100 lawmakers who want the president removed from office.
I joined the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the vice president to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment. If the vice president and the cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment. That is the overwhelming sentiment of my caucus.
Over in the Senate, Mitch McConnell wants an investigation into Capitol security. The Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Michael Stenger, submitting his resignation after Chuck Schumer said he'd fire Stenger once the Democrats take the majority. Meanwhile, today, the president hasn't commented on the Capitol riots, but he did award the Medal of Freedom to 3 golfers, that event closed to the press. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, make that ex-Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao the first member of Trump's cabinet to quit. Today, she tweeted her letter of resignation saying she is deeply troubled by the violence from the president's supporters. This afternoon, President-elect Joe Biden introduced his justice team, officially announcing Judge Merrick Garland as his pick for Attorney General. Biden kicked off the speech condemning the pro-Trump riots.
And I wish we could say we couldn't see it coming. But that isn't true. We could see it coming. The past 4 years, we've had a president who's made his contempt for our democracy, our Constitution, the rule of law clear in everything he has done. He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
NBC News correspondent Mike Memoli joining me now from Wilmington, Delaware. Mike, President-elect Biden said they weren't protesters. Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. What else did Biden say about what happened yesterday at the Capitol?
Yeah, I mean, Biden certainly picked up where he left off yesterday in using those kind of stark terms to describe the scenes that we saw playing out yesterday, calling this an insurrection, saying the conduct of those rioters bordered on sedition. But there was also a layer of this that was stepping back and laying out sort of what brought Biden to this moment. He talked about the fact that the moment that brought him into the 2020 race in the first place was seeing those scenes in Charlottesville, those protests with KKK members protesting about the Confederate statues. He talked about the moments that over the course of the campaign in which he very starkly warned about the kind of tone President Trump continued to set for this country and what motivated Biden to be in this race, and paved that all as part of the conversation he had about introducing his, what Biden advisors were calling privately, Justice League, this team that he is putting into place now to try to reestablish a very clear and independent-minded judicial system. And so there's so much that has been, I think, raised and discussed over the last 24 hours in terms of what steps could be taken by members of Congress, could be taken by the cabinet. But this was Joe Biden trying to remain sort of the voice of reason and really filling into that leadership role vacuum that has been really apparent to all those involved with the inability of the president to denounce what we saw yesterday.
Mike, the Biden transition put out a statement addressing their position on the question of the 25th Amendment. What did they say?
So this gets back, Allison, to the conversations we have a lot about when Biden chooses to engage and when he chooses to hold back. In this case, I asked the transition team where the president-elect stands on this question of should the cabinet meet to potentially invoke the 25th Amendment, and should Congress go ahead with impeachment. And here's what the transition said. President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are focused on their duty preparing to take office on January 20th, and we'll leave it to Vice President Pence and to the Congress to act. Now, this is sort of classic Joe Biden as far as what we've seen. And this is, I think, my understanding of how they believe they've gotten to the point where the fighting is among Republicans really at this point. We're seeing a real reckoning happening within the Republican Party about what a post-Trump future looks like. Some are continuing to cater to Trump and his supporters, and some are very clearly trying to make a break for it. The president-elect, his posture really seems to be here that if he were to call for the 25th Amendment to be invoked, if he were to call for impeachment, it actually makes it harder to get to the right outcome. And so you look at the kind of speech Mitch McConnell gave yesterday, you look at some of the Republicans who are speaking out more strongly. I think the Biden view is that's happening because Biden isn't himself inserting himself strongly to give themselves a foil to rally around. So that's what, to me, is conveyed by this statement this afternoon.
Mike, let's talk about today's nominations. Tell us more about Biden's DOJ picks. The AG stakes, it's finally over.
That's right. It's a team, I think, more than anything, what the Biden team is trying to underscore, has deep experience working in the halls of the Justice Department. We heard that from each of the nominees as they introduced themselves and described their position. Of course, Merrick Garland is known primarily as the man who should have been on the Supreme Court if only Republicans would have given him a hearing. But he talked about his work at the Justice Department starting in the Carter administration. We have Lisa Monaco, who was, yes, part of the West Wing in the Obama administration as a counterterrorism Homeland Security advisor, but also talked about her work under Attorney General Janet Reno and the work she has had in the Justice Department. And then Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, we obviously have talked a lot about the pressure on diversity here in the Biden transition, trying to make sure that they are fulfilling Biden's promise to have a cabinet that looks like America. And these are two very important parts of that, speaking very clearly and starkly to the role that they see the Justice Department as having to play in trying to achieve a more just and to prosecute racial crimes, where that is reinvigorate sort of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department and play an important role in a conversation we're going to be talking about a lot in the early days of the Trump Biden administration, which is what they do to follow through on George Floyd and the promises Biden made to take action to address the racial injustice we see in this country.
Mike, what else did Biden say about how the DOJ will operate under his administration?
So for all the questions we were asking for weeks about what Biden was looking for in the Attorney General and what it might mean for some of those finalists that we thought were part of the mix, I think looking back now, it was clear all along, and indications I'm getting from Biden sources is that Merrick Garland was sort of the clear favorite from a very early stage. And I think you hear that with what the president-elect said today in terms of the importance of an independent and fair-minded judiciary. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I want to be clear to those who lead this department who you will serve. You won't work for me. You are not the president or the vice president's lawyer. Your loyalty is not to me. It's to the law, the Constitution, the people of this nation, to guarantee justice.
This entire set of remarks from the president-elect was really a tribute from him to the independent judicial branch of this government and the way he wants to restore independence to the Justice Department in the Biden administration. He made it very clear that as much as President Trump has talked over the last few years about his justices, about his attorney general, about his members of cabinet, etc., that these are not people who answer to him. These are people who answer to the American people. And that was very clear all along in what he was looking for and why Judge Merrick Garland was sort of at the top of the list all along for his final selection.
Mike, it's a little bit of a sad day. The AG stakes is over. We'd been so excited about this one, talking about this one for so long. Just a lot going on this week to process, long. Certainly adding that to the list as well. No doubt in my mind.
That's
Mike
right.
Memoli, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alison.
Today, the top two Democrats on Capitol Hill, soon-to-be Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, both asking Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove President Trump from office.
I believe the president is dangerous and should not hold office one day longer. He may have only 13 days left as president, but yesterday demonstrated that each and every one of those days is a threat to democracy.
A very dangerous person who should not continue in office. This is urgent. This is emergency of the highest magnitude.
NBC News correspondent Leanne Caldwell joining us now from Capitol Hill. Leanne, more than 100 House lawmakers want President Trump out. That long list includes just one Republican, as far as I know, Adam Kinzinger. He says that if Vice President Pence took over, it would ensure a peaceful transfer of power. What are you hearing? Are there any other Republicans considering formally joining in here, or are they just going to keep voicing their opinions quietly behind closed doors?
So, Allison, I'm hearing there's a lot of conversations going on, and I'm also hearing that there's a lot of hope that the president doesn't do anything to force them to push for the 25th Amendment. So the reason is because it seems like the statement that the president gave overnight about promising a peaceful transition of power has satisfied a little bit some nervous Republicans that perhaps that was obviously horrible, but that was the worst of it, and that the president is just going to sit idly by and not cause any more problems. So there does seem that, and that's the same sentiment that we also got from Senator Lindsey Graham publicly at a press conference earlier today, where he said that if the president does one more thing, then all bets are off and all options are on the table. So Republicans today, most of them, have been relatively silent, especially on this issue specifically today in the 24 hours in the aftermath of what happened yesterday. So, they're nervous, I'm told. There's a lot of conversations happening. No decisions have yet been made, but they say that they're not going to put up with anything else. Of course, these are the more moderate Republicans who have been on edge for a while anyway. Allison.
So, Leanne, how about this talk about impeaching the president? Some lawmakers also want to do that again. Is that a realistic option with just 13 days left in his term? Is that something that could even feasibly happen?
Well, the thing I like to say about Congress is anything can happen, and it can happen quickly if they want to get something done. The last impeachment of the president, I usually don't say that too often, but it lasted a very long time because they had the investigative process, the depositions, and then the trial and the hearings, and it was a long thing, but they can skip all of that. They can just bring articles of impeachment to the floor and they can vote on them the same exact day. So it doesn't need to take a lot of time, but they do have to pass. And so there's not yet a majority of members in the House and the Senate who would support that at this point. So right now, this is why Democrats would like the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment so that they can skip all of that process, and the vice president would then get rid of the president and become acting for the next 13 days. Allison.
Leanne, sticking with this theme of resignations, Pelosi and Schumer would also like the Capitol Police Chief to resign over yesterday's riots. Any response there? And what else are lawmakers planning to do about that police response yesterday?
So a spokesperson to the chief of the Capitol Police said that he has no intention of resigning, but there is a bipartisan outrage and bipartisan frustration about the response by Capitol Police yesterday because they seemed to be unprepared, undermanned, and not able to deal with what was presented to them. One thing that I noticed over the summer when there were threats of protesters, the Black Lives Matter protesters and the racial justice protesters, there was security around here in riot gear. The barriers were much stricter, much more stringent, the metal barriers. Yesterday, they had metal barriers around the perimeter, but there weren't any cops in riot gear. There weren't that many cops outside. And so that is where the failure was, they think. There was just a systemic failure, according to Majority Leader McConnell, of a lack of preparation, a lack of understanding, and a lack of being able to deal with the challenge that was presented to them. So there is a lot of concern and demands for changes, and we will see how quickly those come about. Allison.
Leanne, Senator Mitt Romney is saying that it is time for our country to heal. He wrote an op-ed for Utah's Desert News saying, who we choose to lead us shapes our society. If we choose leaders who inflame resentment and division, our nation will be angry and divided. We have a choice to make. Would we rather have our side win to punish the other side, or would we rather have our nation united? Leanne, could this actually be a moment that brings both parties together, or do I have stars in my eyes here?
It could be, as some lawmakers like to say, that, or as Joe Biden likes to say, actually, is that partisanship is a choice. So is bipartisanship. So it depends on how they deal with it. But I am talking to a lot of members, though, on the more moderate ranks on the Republican and the Democratic side, who do think that it is possible. They think that it's going to be hard, a lot of hard work, that a lot of trust has been broken, and that it's going to take a lot of time. But there is some optimism that it can be done. But I also am a realist, and I've also covered politics for a very long time. And perhaps this will change how people act, especially if there's always going to be divisions on policy. But the difference now is it's gotten so ugly and so personal and so violent. And so perhaps at least that can tone down. But right now, I'm told people are just trying to take a breath, decompress, and process what happened.
Sure.
But they have a lot of work to do if they are trying to get out of the place that they have created. Allison.
Yeah. Look, Leanne, you have reason to be skeptical and reason to be realistic here, because we have seen violence and riots and all kinds of life-changing events in our country change not a whole lot at all. But maybe, I know you are hopeful as well, and I am too, and maybe this can make even just a bit of a difference in any regard. That would be great. Leanne Caldwell,
Absolutely.
thanks so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.